Hello. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here this evening for this wonderful conversation between Gerard Koskovich and Daniel Brook, the author of the Einstein of Sex, Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld, visionary of Weimar, Berlin, co-organized with our friends, the Goethe Institute here in San Francisco. So this evening we'll have about 45 minutes or so of conversation between our two panelists here, and then open it up to questions. If you haven't had a chance already to check out the exhibition in the front gallery, I Live the Life I Love Because I Love the Life I Live, which we recently opened. It's a celebration of trans people of color. Please do either on the way out or please come back. The show will be up through the middle of February, and there will be programming, more information about that to come. The restrooms are just behind you there, should you need them, and if you need anything else or have any other questions, myself and my colleagues will be just in the back there. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Gerard to introduce Daniel and to kick things off.
Thank you very much, Elena. So my name is Gerard Koskovich. I'm a founding member of the GLBT Historical Society and a longtime Hirschfeld enthusiast collector. I've published about Hirschfeld in English and French and have presented about him a lot and learned about Daniel's project fairly early on and have been so excited to see it come to fruition. So let me introduce our speaker this evening, and Daniel's going to do about a 35-minute illustrated talk. Then I'll do a little mini interview with him, and then we'll open out to questions and comments from the audience. At the end, I'll do a mini display here of a few Hirschfeld rare first editions from my collection, and you can buy Daniel's book and have him sign it right out there in front. Please patronize the lovely book stand. So Daniel Brook, who we have with us this evening, is a journalist and author whose writing has appeared in Harper's, the New York Times Magazine, and The Nation, among other publications. He was born in Brooklyn, raised on Long Island, educated at Yale, and now lives in New Orleans. Daniel has received numerous grants, including a Klug Fellowship at the Library of Congress and a Robert and Ina Caro Research Travel Fellowship from the Biographers International Organization, very convenient in this case. His 2013 book, A History of Future Cities, was selected as a favorite book of the year by the Washington Post, then a credible publication. And so we're pleased to welcome Daniel to the GLBT Historical Society Museum this evening to present The Einstein of Sex, his new biography of homosexual and transgender emancipation pioneer, Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld. The book has rightly been attracting attention, including recognition just yesterday by The New Yorker, still a credible publication, as a best book of 2025. And Now, the moment for a new English language biography of Hirschfeld is timely for a couple of major reasons. First, this is a year of anniversaries. This year marks the 90th anniversary of Hirschfeld's death in exile in France in 1935. And we have another anniversary coming up, especially for us here in San Francisco. We're just 2 months away from the 95th anniversary of Hirschfeld's arrival in San Francisco in 1931 for a 10-day stay. And as a world-renowned sexologist, he gave his last ever public talk in the United States, a lecture on homosexuality here in our city in March of 1931. The moment is timely for another reason, and a troubling one. The Nazi regime destroyed Hirschfeld's Great Institute for Sexual Science in 1933, carting off much of the library and archives for a massive book burning in Berlin. And since the beginning of January, the MAGA regime here in our country has carried out a massive digital book burning, seeking to erase LGBTQ plus knowledge from all federal websites, and has since moved on to attack the work of libraries and museums that document queer and trans lives and cultures, and to target universities that do the same. So a destruction of LGBTQ knowledge production that has strong parallels with the 1930s. Daniel's biography ends with an epilogue drawing those parallels between the 1930s and today and highlighting the ongoing transformative force of Hirschfeld's thinking on sexuality and on racism, a lesser-known aspect of his work. So I'll now hand off to Daniel to give us an overview of his portrait of Hirschfeld, and I'll then ask Daniel a few questions and then open to comments from all of you. I know, given the difficult times in which we find ourselves, that we have very much to discuss this evening.
Thank you, Gerard, so much for that generous introduction. I should say tonight is actually the first time Gerard and I have met in person, but Gerard's reputation as a gentleman and a scholar precedes him. His scholarship speaks for itself. His gentlemanliness, I think, should be discussed in deeper detail. He, well, one is in the first instance, he brings to his scholarship a public spiritedness that brings the amazing documents that he collects sort of out into the world where they can inspire us to this day. He's also has such a generosity of spirit. I reached out to Gerard when I realized he had done an exhibit here in this space on Hirschfeld's time in San Francisco, which was something I sort of stumbled upon. I was fascinated by the fact that Hirschfeld was in San Francisco. My book, myself being an American, highlights Hirschfeld's 2 trips to America, one as a young, actual cub reporter, kind of stringer for a German newspaper in the 1890s, and then again, essentially on the run from the Nazis in the 1930s. And Gerard was very happy to give me access to all of the research he had done, which is now in the book. So thank you very much for that. I'd also like to thank this institution for hosting, the LGBT Historical Society of San Francisco, and the Goethe Institute. This is actually the third of a talk I've given that the Goethe Institute has partnered on, one in New York, one in Los Angeles, and then here. And I should say, when this book came out in May, it was sort of gearing up to come out in January, when the world changed quite dramatically. A lot of institutions that get funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities seem to be getting cold feet about hosting a talk on this topic. Goethe Institute stepped up in our moment of need with help on that front. So thank you to both. I am going to do something slightly unconventional. I'm going to read to you just a few passages from the book, but mostly I'm going to give you a visual introduction to Hirschfeld's life and thought. Through maps, documents, photographs, all drawn from the era of his life, which was, I think, just a tremendously stylish era. We have movie posters, photographs of parties. I think it's just a joy to look at. Although, obviously, spoiler alert, there are some difficult moments in his life as well. And then we'll do a little Q&A up here, and then we'll open it up, and then finally, Gerard will have some artifacts for you to look at, and I will be signing books. So I'm just going to reorient myself so I can see the screen. All right. Is it? Are you in the line of sight of the? Okay, there we go. Sorry.
Switch chairs.
Yes, let's do that. Okay.
That way you'll be closer to the...
All right. This is obviously one of the most horrific events of the 20th century. The book burning in Berlin, 1933. We know this image so well. I suspect many of us can just run the newsreel footage in our mind's eye. But we probably don't know, and what I did not know till I embarked on this project, is that the trove of books that are being burned that night were seized from the Institute for Sexual Science, which was Magnus Hirschfeld's research institute, museum, think tank, clinic, both psychological and surgical, in the heart of Berlin. Image on your left is very well known. Image on your right is a Hitler Youth actually exposing the frontispiece of a book by Hirschfeld. At this event, a bust of Magnus Hirschfeld, which had been created by a sculptor friend of his for his 60th birthday, was paraded around as the books were burned. Again, incredibly famous event, incredibly not famous photograph. I was shocked myself when I came across it. We can imagine that the Nazis had a lot of bones to pick with Magnus Hirschfeld. He was a, let's count, gay, Jewish, social democrat, scientist, intellectual, the list goes on and on and on. But the contention of my book is that he kind of had to become their public enemy number one, not so much for all of the boxes he checked, but for his theory that all divisions between human beings are arbitrary, that essentially humanity is actually a giant continuum, and that when someone tries to impose categories like masculine and feminine, white and black, Aryan and Semite, even trans and cis in terms of continuum of sexuality, it says more about the person or party or demagogue making the distinction than it does about the people who are being divided. Hirschfeld embarks on this idea, this great intellectual project of his life very early. He's practicing as a psychotherapist for queer patients in Magdeburg, which is a kind of smaller city in eastern Germany, and has convinced himself that by telling these clients who come in and think they're sick and they need to be cured, that actually maybe they need a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or they just need to be guided towards self-acceptance. And by the way, the Sailor Bar on Tuesday nights after 10 p.m. might be a place you could go to meet such a person. He kind of convinces himself that he's making real progress, and then one of his patients, who he only identifies pseudonymously as Lieutenant von X, commits suicide and sends Hirschfeld a suicide note that says, private psychotherapy is not going to cut it. Like, there's a law, paragraph 175, that makes it a crime punishable by imprisonment for a man to have sex with a man. As long as that is on the books, all the self-acceptance is going to be inadequate. And you, Magnus Hirschfeld, need to take a public stand on this issue, which was not, Magnus Hirschfeld was not sort of personality-wise predisposed to take a public stand. He was kind of a quiet medical doctor, essentially, but spurred by this patient's suicide, he does take this first timid kind of step into the public realm with this anonymously written pamphlet, Sappho and Socrates, or What Explains the Love of People for Their Own Sex. And it's with a pseudonym, Dr. Thomas Ramin, who does not exist, a Berlin physician. 2 years later, when in the second edition, he actually comes out as the author and puts his own name on it. And even here in this first book, which is ostensibly on tolerance for gay men and lesbians, he's already drifting into the idea that everyone essentially is sexually unique. He has this chart that he creates, this like very sober German man of science chart, where you or I or anyone can plot their level of same-sex and opposite-sex attraction on this pyramid chart. So already you have myriad possibilities for different levels of homosexuality, heterosexuality, bisexuality. And then he says, even when you do occasionally have two people who might have the same, it's like A4 plus B2 or whatever, the same value in this chart, they're still sexually unique. He writes, "Let us also consider the endless variety of tastes, according to which one likes blondes, the other dark hair, that one the strong, this one the delicate, that one the smooth, others the hairy, this one a petite foot, another a soulful eye, this one the uniformed, that one a naked person." He continues with his research. He tries to document the percentage. So I should say, within this chart, you're already moving from a kind of beyond a sort of gay-straight binary, and even beyond a sort of, if you will, gay-straight bi trinary, into this kind of prismatic idea. He begins to kind of document this with survey research. He sends first to a metalworkers union and then to a boys' technical high school, magnet school, this sexual orientation survey, where he has them underline if you're attracted to women or men. This works in German and English, closely related languages, or women and men. And in the first one, he just asked for an underline under each. This is for the metal workers. And when he sends it to the high school, he changes the instructions, and he says, if you're attracted to men and women, put a double underline under the one you're more attracted to, if it applies. So again, he's getting this data set that kind of documents queerness, but he's already seeing sexuality in a prismatic manner. In 1904, so 1896, he publishes this gay rights pamphlet. 1898, he kind of comes out publicly as its author. He found something in tandem called the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, which is a gay rights organization trying to overturn paragraph 175. This organization is founded, sort of thinks of itself as a upper middle class to aristocratic gay men's organization that is going to teach the German public why they need to overturn the law. But one of the aristocratic gay men, the Baron von Teschenberg, in 1904 sends Magnus Hirschfeld this carte de visite. These are these calling cards that are, in bourgeois society at the time, you just kind of leave if the person can't take you for tea at that moment. And Baron von Teschenberg tells Magnus Hirschfeld, this is my true nature, and I want you to publish it. So what had begun as a gay men's campaign has turned into something quite different, right? Baron von Teschenberg is what today we would identify, would call trans, or would presumably identify as trans. And therefore, this campaign has to be broader, as does Hirschfeld's sort of activist work and his scientific intellectual work. In part spurred by Baron von Teschenberg, Hirschfeld begins to take in patients who would now presumably self-identify as trans, and Hirschfeld writes up the first sympathetic study of trans individuals, coining the word die Transvestiten, which is not a word, transvestites, which is not a word we would use today. I think it still stands as the first sympathetic study. And in it, he does, there's 17 case studies. 16 of them are individuals who are assigned male at birth. One is an individual who is assigned female at birth. The book kind of gets into it. That last individual, I think, has the most amazing story, and Hirschfeld did sort of fact-check basic information. This individual ends up circumnavigating the globe on a Norwegian whaling ship, has kind of amazing antics, comes to Hirschfeld's practice in Berlin because of a scandal that's reported in all the papers, where this person is working as a house painter in Berlin and is discovered to be having an affair with the lady of the house that's being painted, and then it's a whole thing. And actually, this person, after meeting Hirschfeld and giving this narrative, it's a collection of trans narratives from early 20th century Germany and beyond. Then they disappear again, and who's to know sort of where they end up. But in this book, again, Hirschfeld comes up with a theory that masculinity and femininity can express itself in all of these different aspects of our lives. Obviously, like physical attributes, but also our cultural interests, our emotional lives. And he creates this kind of giant factorial equation where when you think of all of the ways that masculinity or femininity can express itself in a given individual and show all of the permutations, he comes up with over 43 million possibilities of mixtures of masculinity and femininity that can manifest in any individual human being. And then he has an artist friend of his draw up this portrait of what Hirschfeld calls the absolute man and the absolute woman. So these are the people for whom, who are the hairy, bearded gentleman is masculine in every aspect of his life. He only wants to drink beer and watch football and go hunting, and then this blonde lady is feminine in every aspect of her physicality and emotional life, and then the rest of us are all somewhere in between. These two people. I think that's roughly like the population of California, right? Is around that. So like there's one absolute man and one absolute woman out there somewhere in this state, and then the rest of us are somewhere in between these two archetypes. He is simultaneously, he's doing this scientific work. Die Transvestiten is really a book that's geared towards medical professionals and even, scientists and judges, and it's kind of academic-y material. He's also putting out pamphlets, like What People Should Know About the Third Sex, which is a kind of colloquial term in German at that time for queer people that Hirschfeld himself says he doesn't really like that term, but that's what everyone uses. He has a book called Berlin's Third Sex. That's an amazing look at queer life in early 20th century Berlin, which I should say has recently been widely published and is now widely available in English through the University of Toronto Press, and is like a fun read. So as a biographer, I'm reading like everything he wrote, right? And some of it is this incredibly, let's say, dry scientific work aimed at other medical doctors and scientists. And then some of it is pamphlets that are aimed at the general public, or books like Berlin's Third Sex, which is really a work of journalism, essentially, with like undercover narratives of, because there are spaces where Hirschfeld, being male, can't get into, and he has these like lesbian informants who explain like the drag balls of that world. It's a romp, and you can read it yourselves now. This world he's in has great parties. This is at the Institute. This is Hirschfeld with the glasses, looking very rumpled, as he often does, holding the hand of Karl, his long-term partner. I should say in the German racial system, but not the American racial system, they're in an interracial relationship, in that Hirschfeld is from a Jewish family and Karl's from a Christian family. Karl's mother is at your far left in the black dress. And this is kind of a nice insight into Hirschfeld, because he's always writing in this very scientific, he presents himself as a scientist, even in his more journalistic stuff. He says, the homosexuals, do they do this, kind of with this distance from it. One thing he writes is that in Berlin, many parents accept their queer children's partners as, as daughter-in-laws or son-in-laws. Now, he doesn't break the third wall and say, and one of these women is my mother-in-law. But, she's sort of hidden in plain sight right in this photo. So part of the fun as a biographer is kind of connecting the experiences of his life, which are well documented, which we know, with this kind of more sober third-person sometimes academic-y work. This is a photograph of the Institute. It fronts on the Tiergarten, which is the Central Park of Berlin. Hirschfeld, unlike Freud, his kind of frenemy and rival, he thinks your therapy is best done outside in nature, the kind of walk and talk therapy, where he and his patient will walk through the Tiergarten and discuss, for psychotherapy purposes. I realize now, this is not in the book, I should have thought of this earlier, part of it is probably also about changing society, right? Just having someone be openly trans in public in the middle of the Tiergarten as a therapeutic measure for the society. So it's cited right here. It's walking distance from the Reichstag, the parliament of the German government. It's founded in 1919, I should say, which is when Germany becomes a democracy. It's also walking distance from the main train station, which was then called the Lehrte Bahnhof. It's now just Hauptbahnhof, the main train station. So it becomes like it's a think tank where, politicians, the activists can scheme how they're going to convince a politician to vote a different way on a bill, right by the parliament. It's a tourist attraction where there's a museum exhibit, which essentially gives Hirschfeld's ideas to the public in a more digestible format. And then there are clinics for therapy and for surgery. This is Dr. Felix Abraham, who's the head of the trans psychotherapy unit of the Institute. You can see Dr. Abraham does not do walk and talk therapy. Dr. Abraham has a very well-appointed office with a lot of drapery and heavy furniture. But of course, he subscribes to Hirschfeld's general outlook about trans self-acceptance. And this is a wonderful artifact. This is one of Dr. Abraham's scripts, one of his prescription forms. And it is an actual medical doctor prescription form where ordinarily a doctor would write something like 20 milligrams of amoxicillin twice a day. Okay, there are 3 items on this prescription form. The first one is Paul Riggers. Paul Riggers is a person. Paul Riggers is the head of the Trans Club of Berlin. So the first assignment is you need to meet Paul Riggers and maybe consider going to meetings of the Trans Club of Berlin. That would be therapeutic for you. And then the two other things, Molly and Eagle and Ariana, these are trans-friendly nightclubs. So it's literally hit 2 bars and call me in the morning. But you can see the type of therapy that's being given in the institute, but also how the institute is kind of in this endless sort of virtual circle with the city of Berlin, where it's shaping the city shaping it. Also, the attempt to sort of change public culture is also an attempt to change the laws. I mean, this is what's called a trans passport or trans license. Hirschfeld convinces the Berlin police to issue these ID cards, these trans ID cards. This is, in this moment, this is extra awful with my niece's passport. Yeah, to issue trans ID cards so that people who are trans can appear in the clothing that doesn't correspond to the gender assigned at birth. And this is Gerard Koskovich, who's a trans man who worked as a carpenter in East Berlin. In 1928, Gerard Koskovich is given this permit. The laws at the time in Germany and other parts of Europe was that you could only appear in clothing that did not conform to gender assigned at birth on Mardi Gras. And the rest of the year it was criminalized. It was considered disturbing the peace, and there were fines, and there were jail time, and all of this. So in Berlin, at least, with this ID, the bearer of this ID was insulated against those laws, even though those laws did remain on the books. This is the Institute's core exhibit, the sexual transitions. This explains Hirschfeld's idea of gender as a spectrum. These photographs have the same individual in stereotypically male and stereotypically female clothing. These are different trans individuals. And you see at the top, it says Magnus Hirschfeld, and then it's English, French, and German. So this is kind of a signal that this is an institution that is speaking beyond just the borders of Berlin or even just the borders of Germany to the wider world of Europe and even to the wider world in general. We kind of know this little nod and a wink from Willkommen, Bienvenue, welcome, the opening number of Cabaret, but it really is based on this type of thing which you would have seen in Berlin at the time. Hirschfeld is also adopting, as technology develops, especially with Germany being a democracy in 1919, he's moving with the times. He embraces film very early. The very first films are from France in the 1890s, and they're just about the wonder of motion. The first film, it sounds like a joke, the first film is shift change at a factory. All it is, it's just workers walking in and out of a factory. That's the thing. Then it's like horses and trains. But by 1910-ish, some directors and producers are realizing that this can be a sort of activist medium, that through storytelling and through drama and through melodrama, minds can be changed on public issues. One of the public issues, of course, that Hirschfeld is most interested in is overturning paragraph 175. And he and a collaborator, Richard Oswald, who's a filmmaker who specializes in these kind of social justice films, collaborate on what's probably the first queer film, which is different from the others, Anders als die anderen. And it's kind of the screenplay is kind of like a Romana Clef of Hirschfeld's patient, Lieutenant von X, who commits suicide on the eve of his wedding and urges Hirschfeld to take a public role. In the movie, it's Conrad Veidt, who's a very accomplished and good-looking actor, is the protagonist, and he's a concert violinist who is outed, well, first who's sort of stalked by a blackmailer who's threatening him to send him to jail under paragraph 175, and then it becomes a scandal, and his agent cancels all of his gigs, and he commits suicide by taking pills as he reads the newspaper. We always say as writers, show, don't tell. And then I was like, oh, well, that shows it. That he grew up with that.
Indeed. Now, one of the things I find fascinating about your book is that, particularly towards the later part, you're presenting a story of Hirschfeld's interactions with imperialism, racism, that is quite different from what we've seen in some of the extremely critical historical publications from academic historians and rigid theorists in the last 15 years. Talk a little bit about how you looked at their work and saw things differently.
Yeah, this might be a little inside baseball, but there's actually a tremendous scholar who kind of looms over this field, Lori Marhofer, whose German is flawless, whose archival skills are incredible, who's unearthed a lot of material on Hirschfeld, but also is very critical of Hirschfeld in a way that, as I see it, is sort of making valid points about the shortcomings of our own society and of the shortcomings of the queer movement in Western societies today, and kind of laying it on Hirschfeld in a way that I think is sort of unfair. And I say that in the acknowledgments. One place, for example, is he goes up to Harlem, he's on the subway, and he writes in his journal, some of these, the Americans say that the Africans all live uptown, but some of these Africans are the color of black coffee, and some are the color of Viennese coffee, which is coffee with milk, and some are the color of milk. To which Marhofer says, how dare you compare human beings to food? Would you ever do this with a European? I don't know. I just finished reading a book in New Orleans about Creoles in New Orleans, and it starts with this disclaimer like, okay, it's by a Creole of color, and it's just like, okay, I know this is off-putting, but we always use food metaphors. So my uncle's the color of a nut, and it's just how we talk. And in general, I think there is a little bit of is this glass half full or half empty? I have always leaned towards being more amazed that people in the past see so much than angry that they see so little. And I kind of hope 100 years from now that we'll be extended that same grace by the people writing about all of our shortcomings.
Hear, hear. And I have to say, you picked out the passage that is the weakest and most evident ideological sort of kangaroo court in Laurie's book.
No, the most kangaroo court is Laurie rakes Hirschfeld over the coals for his relationship with Li Shutong, as essentially sort of like a proto-rice queen, essentially, right? And I was thinking, well, if Hirschfeld, let's have a hypothetical where Hirschfeld does the opposite, where he only dates Jewish men or only dates European men, then he's racist because he won't, date Asians or
exactly.
Yeah. So it felt like the kind of the Salem witch trials, right? Whereas if she sinks, she's a woman, but if she floats, she's a witch. So if she floats, we have to burn her alive. It felt like that.
Yes. Well, and the specific passage you mentioned, Hirschfeld is describing being on the subway with black women on either side of him, who he describes as beautiful, and compares them to these colors of coffee and himself, or to rye bread, and himself to a slice of ham. And from that, Lori Marhofer portrays Hirschfeld as one of the most repugnant racists known, and no one should ever put up a statue to him. This is in a society in which even New York was profoundly segregated, in which people were being lynched in the South, and Hirschfeld was cheerfully sitting on the subway between black women describing how much he appreciated them. That doesn't and comparing himself to ham, which Laurie doesn't talk about at all. And Hirschfeld was Jewish.
Very weird.
So let's just say the passage in its own right suggests that there might be other ways of thinking about Hirschfeld in his time. In part, this is what some historians refer to as presentism. If the person doesn't embrace our current way of thinking about things, then they are 100% wrong. I look at Hirschfeld and say, compared to most people from his background in his era, he was struggling to try to break out of racist thinking. Did he arrive at the way anti-racists would do it now? No, because it was 1930.
But he does. I think he brings some Eurocentric attitudes with him that I think we bring too. You go on a vacation to Barbados and you're like, God damn it, why is it taking so long for the entree to come out? People are chauvinistic to this day. It's our own, but he's very cognizant of the errors of it, and he's giving quotes to newspapers in China literally saying, we will one day regard the holding of colonies the way we regard the holding of slaves today. which I think for that era is just like breathtakingly progressive. So
Exactly, and in part you trace this in the book as well, the extent to which over time his thinking changed. He was constantly criticizing himself, constantly observing the world around him, constantly asking people for feedback. So it's easy to find Hirschfeld saying something at the beginning of World War I, praising the great German nation as the greatest nation on earth, and everybody's being mean to Germany because they're jealous of us. He literally published a pamphlet that says that.
Yeah.
And by the end of his life, he was mortified to have held that position. He was horrified to look back on his earlier self and see how wrong he was. So I tend to want to say, let's reward the amount of change that happened rather than find all the moments in his life where he said something we find appalling. And your statement, we hope that in 100 years people will give us the grace of seeing what we've done that is positive and seeing our efforts to struggle, and they'll see a whole lot of things that are invisible to us now that will be mortifying, that we just take as normal. We could probably give Hirschfeld that same kind of courtesy. Besides, as a historian, I don't think there are any heroes. There are ordinary people struggling in their time to try to change things, and some changes we find positive, some we find negative. Sort of like us right now.
Yeah, and his energy is amazing and inspiring, that he was fighting. Paragraph 175 is not repealed until the 1990s in Germany.
So just to wrap up, tell us a little bit about what makes Hirschfeld's life and work, for all its complexities and some of the areas which still look a little kooky to us now, in what ways is his work and his thinking, his life relevant to us today and useful to us today?
Yeah. I should say I'm as disturbed and shocked at sort of what's become of our country as the rest of us. This is not the world I thought I was dropping this book into. I thought I was dropping this book into a world where everyone had equal rights, but this fascinating story of the fight for equal rights goes back much further than we thought. That's not the world we're living in. I think that makes Hirschfeld all the more important. We're encountering in our country in real time a party and a demagogue trying to divide us along all kinds of lines. And take away all kinds of rights, women's reproductive rights, trans people's rights to exist and be recognized for who they are. And we're having to sort of refight this in real time. Thankfully, Hirschfeld's final book, Racism, has a whole analysis of how fascism works. It takes them at their word. There's an actual Nazi slogan. They're very unsubtle, these Nazis. The actual Nazi slogan, Rassenkampf statt Klassenkampf, racial struggle instead of class struggle, or really race war instead of class war. And they're very explicit about sort of unifying a majoritarian Aryan us against a despised Jewish them as a way to avoid having to deal with actual maldistribution of wealth and problems of the economic depression in Germany. That playbook is still being followed to a T. I think Hirschfeld's warnings about it are incredibly important for all of us to reckon with today.
Thank you. Let's wrap up there. If you want to see some Hirschfeld things, I'll get them out. And please buy a book and have Daniel sign it. And thank you all for coming.